Hello, I'm Pete, the creator and host of the YouTube channel Creepy Little Book. On my shows, I focus on fringe topics like urban legends, odd history, and the modern day mythology of conspiracy theories. My passion is research, and in that effort, I often come across stories of some amazing people and occurrences. And that's the kind of story I want to share with you this evening. The tale of one person who looked back over the course of his life, who had firsthand witnessed the suffering of his fellow man and decided to become a force for positive change. A man of such character that when he found himself in a position to single-handedly alter the course of history, he stood incorruptibly. Now, before we begin, please don't forget to subscribe or make sure that you're still subscribed. Our subject today is a man named General Smedley Darlington Butler. Butler was born on July 30th, 1881 in Westchester, Pennsylvania. He came from an upper-class Quaker family. His father had been both a lawyer and a judge and served for 31 years as a congressman and chair of the House Naval Affairs Committee. And Smedley Butler had been well educated, attending both the Westchester Friends High School and the Haverford School until the age of 16. Then, just 5 weeks before his 17th birthday and against the wishes of his family, Smedley Darlington Butler ran away from home to join the Marines. Now, as I mentioned, Butler came from a Quaker family. Quakers, according to their faith, are pacifists. In time, this paradox would earn him the moniker of the Fightin' Quaker. Now, lying about his age, he joins the Marines, and Butler was first sent to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba during the Spanish-American War. Then he was off to the Philippines, where he saw his first combat during the Philippine-American War. Here is also where he got a gigantic tattoo on his chest. It was the Marine emblem, an anchor, globe, and eagle that went from his neck to his waist, tattooed in the Philippines in 1899. That's pretty bold. Now, after the Philippines, Butler was sent to China to help quell the Boxer Rebellion. Here is where he would truly witness the horrors of war for the first time. But when Butler saw a fellow Marine take a hit, he launched himself from a trench under heavy fire and across the battlefield into a hail of bullets to rescue him, getting himself shot in the process. For this act of selfless bravery, Butler was awarded a promotion and the Marine Corps' Bereavement Medal. He is one of only 20 men to ever receive this award. He was 19 years old. In 1903, during the Banana Wars, he was stationed in Puerto Rico on the island of Culebra. The U.S. government had heard about a revolt in Honduras, so they sent Butler. He and his Marines landed in Honduras and marched right into the middle of a gunfight between Honduran soldiers and rebel forces. Once these factions spotted the Marines, the battle, which had raged for 55 hours, came to a sudden stop, and Butler led his men to the consulate and rescued the U.S. consul. Here is where he was first given the nickname Old Gimlet Eye because of his extraordinary bloodshot eyes, caused by some type of unnamed tropical fever. In 1905, Butler returned to Philadelphia and was married to Ethel Conway Peters. He was then stationed in the Philippines on garrison duty, but suffered a nervous breakdown in 1908. He was granted 9 months of sick leave and returned home to Philadelphia, returning to active duty at his first chance. Starting in 1909, he spent 3 years in Nicaragua protecting U.S. interests. During this time, and with a 104-degree fever, he would successfully lead his men to rescue a town besieged by rebels. He also led the Battle of Mayasi and helped capture Coyotepe Hill in 1912. He would go on to Mexico in 1914 during a time of a growing revolutionary movement. He would go undercover, posing as a railroad official looking for a lost employee, but what he was really doing was reconnaissance, updating maps and confirming railroad tracks for a possible U.S. invasion of Mexico. The entire plan was scrapped after an international incident known as the Tampico Affair. Woodrow Wilson received intelligence that arms shipments were en route to Mexico, so he sent Butler and his Marines to intercept it. They went door to door, routing out rebels in a hard-fought scrap through sniper fire and street battles. For his actions, Butler would receive the Medal of Honor, which he tried to give back. He was then off to Haiti in 1915. After the Haitian president had been killed by an angry mob, the U.S. sent Butler and his Marines via the USS Connecticut. On October 24, he and 44 Marines on horseback were ambushed by 400 rebels. They held their ground all night, and in the morning, they broke off into 3 groups and charged the enemy, who were so surprised by the attack that they retreated. Slowly, the Marines retook control of the island, except for one last stronghold, Fort Riviera. Butler was provided with 3 companies of Marines, along with some sailors from the USS Connecticut, and with 100 men, slowly closed in on the fort. They found a breach in the southern wall that allowed him and his men access to the fort, where they engaged the enemy in hand-to-hand combat. The entire battle lasted only 20 minutes, with only 1 Marine injured, his tooth knocked out by a rock thrown at his head, and all of the rebels dead. This would earn Butler his second Medal of Honor. In 1918, Butler was promoted to brigadier general and placed in a non-combat role in command of a debarkation camp in France. Here, he improved camp conditions by using duckboards, which are basically wooden pallets. He used them to elevate the camp above the muddy ground. He even carried the first duckboard up the 4-mile hill himself. This was a pretty big deal, and he was given a third nickname, Old Duckboard. He was also awarded the Army Distinguished Service Medal, the Navy Distinguished Service Medal, and the French Order of the Black Star for exceptionally meritorious and distinguished service to the government of the United States in a duty of great responsibility during World War I. He became commanding general of the Marine Barracks at Quantico after the war, when he turned a wartime training camp into the permanent base that remains to this day. So in 1924, Philadelphia had a problem. Speakeasies, bootlegging, prostitution, gambling, along with corrupt police and an even more corrupt city hall. The new mayor, W. Freeland Kendrick, at the urging of Butler's father, requested that Butler leave the Marines and take on the role of Philadelphia's public safety officer, overseeing both the police and fire department. Butler refused, so Kendrick reached out to then-President Calvin Coolidge. At the president's request, Butler took leave from the military to take on the job of cleaning up Philly. He took up the post in January of 1924 and started by addressing all 4,000 of the city's police to make sure they knew that things were about to change and there was a new sheriff in town. Butler began to war on crime, starting with the corruption in law enforcement. He replaced and reassigned sometimes entire departments to different ends of the city to break the police protection rackets. And in his first 48 hours on the job, he raided over 900 speakeasies. Not only the ones frequented by the working class and the poor, but high society establishments like the Ritz-Carlton and the Union League were targeted. He would make sweeping changes to the police department, new uniforms in the style of the Marines, new guidelines. He set up military-inspired checkpoints in and out of the city, and he created a bandit squad with armored cars and sawed-off shotguns. After 6 months on the job, the situation in the city drastically improved, but public opinion of Butler and his methods wasn't that great. People thought that his tactics were too aggressive and that he was violating people's civil rights with his checkpoints. And during his weekly radio addresses, he would swear like a Marine, which led people to criticize how his behavior was inappropriate for someone in his position. It was clear that despite his attentions and even the accomplishments during his time in Philadelphia as public safety officer, that he wasn't long for the job. And after a little more than a year of cleaning up Philly streets, Butler returned to the Marines, where he'd serve out his last 4 years of active duty before retirement. Now, after his military career, Smedley Butler ran a failed campaign for the U.S. Senate in 1932, running as a Republican candidate. But by 1936, Butler had moved so far left on the political spectrum, he supported an open socialist candidate in the 1936 presidential election. Now, the reason for this dramatic shift of worldview in just over 4 short years had much to do with his post-military career as a lecturer. In 1932, Butler had come to D.C., and his purpose was to address the bonus army. These were men who had fought in World War I who were owed payments by the government. They came to the capital with their families, and they set up tent cities in an attempt to pressure Congress to pay what they were owed. Butler was a hero, and he was famous, and he came to urge these men to not quit, to keep up the pressure on these elected officials, to force Washington to make good. He pointed out that no one called them bums when they answered a nation's call and went off to war, and they shouldn't be considered riffraff now that the war was over. As I said, he was a lecturer. He did lecture tours all across the country, donating most of the money he made to the Philadelphia Unemployment Fund. During his tours, he would often visit VA hospitals and meet with soldiers, the battered, the maimed, and the broken men devastated by the horrors of war. He became an outspoken advocate for what we now call PTSD. He also became a staunch anti-war activist. In his book, War is a Racket, he outlines the massive profits that industry made off of every war he was involved in. He details the massive earnings that corporations raked in from the deaths of so many around the world in the name of defending the country. But what he knew was really to defend United States economic interests. In China, he fought for oil. In Central America, for the fruit companies. He saw with full clarity that every single military action he was part of was all about corporate money. He even details these corporate windfalls in depth in his book. But perhaps the most startling aspect of the story of General Smedley Butler is something called the business plot. Butler had been approached in 1932 by 2 men named Gerald C. McGuire and Bill Doyle. They used the pretext that they wished to arrange him to speak at a gathering of the American Legion. These men were in reality agents representing powerful industrialists and bankers, the Warburgs, the Rockefellers and Standard Oil, and J.P. Morgan among them. Their true agenda was to recruit Smedley Butler to take command of a 500,000-man army, which would then march on Washington, D.C. They wanted Butler to lead a coup d'etat to overthrow President Franklin D. Roosevelt and install a fascist dictatorship here in the United States. For months, Butler led them on collecting information. He contacted a reporter to dig into the story in secret to corroborate the plot. In 1934, Butler would testify to Congress, specifically the McCormick-Dickstein Committee, regarding the conspiracy. The media of the day called it a hoax. The New York Times painted Butler as a liar. They called the whole thing fake news. It's funny how that works when the media and the banks are controlled by the same people. But Butler never backed down on his claims. In the end, Congress determined that the plot was real, that there was more than enough evidence to confirm that some of the most powerful and wealthy men in the country conspired to undermine the Republic and bring fascism to America. And while Butler was vindicated, no one was ever prosecuted for the plot. Now, Smedley Butler died here in Philadelphia in June of 1940 from stomach cancer. And to this day, you can walk to Philadelphia City Hall and see the plaque honoring the man who was incorruptible, a man who could have changed the course of history, but instead single-handedly saved the nation. Now, this is only a small synopsis of the story of Smedley Butler. I recommend his book, War is a Racket, as well as The Plot to Seize the White House by Jules Archer, if you want to read up more about this on yourself. As always, thank you so much for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. The Creepy Little Book takes no advertising revenue from YouTube, so consider becoming a supporter via Patreon, PayPal, or cryptocurrency, or by making a purchase via the Teespring store. Links to those sites and all my social media are in the description. This has been the Creepy Little Book. I'm Pete, and until next time, stay creeped out.